The November rain taps against the tall windows of the Grand Plaza Hotel's elegant lobby. A well-dressed businessman in his early 60s stands quietly near the marble column, his silver hair neatly combed, wearing a simple dark coat that probably costs more than most people's monthly salary. But nobody notices him. He's just another guest in this luxury hotel, or so they think. He watches as an elderly couple approaches the front desk. They look tired after what seems to be a long journey. The woman leans slightly on her husband's arm, her other hand gripping a worn leather handbag. The husband, wearing a weathered brown jacket, speaks softly to the front desk clerk. "Good evening. We have a reservation under the name Thompson. My wife and I have been driving all day to attend our granddaughter's graduation tomorrow." The front desk clerk, a young man in his 20s with perfectly styled hair and an expensive-looking watch, barely glances at his computer screen before responding. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're fully booked tonight. I don't see your reservation." The elderly man frowns, reaching for his phone with slightly trembling hands. "But I have the confirmation email right here. We booked this 3 months ago. My granddaughter's ceremony is at the university, just 2 blocks away." The businessman near the column shifts slightly, his jaw tightening. He can clearly see the hotel's occupancy dashboard on the clerk's computer screen from where he stands. The hotel is only at 48% capacity tonight. There are at least 200 rooms available. The clerk sighs, making no effort to hide his annoyance. "Sir, as I said, we're fully booked. Perhaps you made the reservation for a different date? Or a different hotel? There's a budget hotel about 20 minutes away that might have availability." The elderly woman squeezes her husband's arm, whispering something in his ear. Their disappointment is visible, their dignity intact, despite the clerk's dismissive attitude. The husband nods quietly, turning away from the desk. The businessman's hand clenches in his pocket, where he's holding a small leather wallet. Inside is his ID card, the one that identifies him as Robert Wilson, CEO and owner of the International Plaza Hotel Group, including this very hotel. This flagship location, the Grand Plaza, was his first hotel, built 30 years ago, with a promise to treat every guest like family. He watches as the elderly couple moves slowly toward the revolving doors, back into the cold rain. The front desk clerk has already turned his attention to his phone, smirking at something on the screen. Just then, a young woman in designer clothes approaches the desk. The clerk's demeanor changes instantly, back straightening, smile widening. "Good evening, welcome to the Grand Plaza." "Hi, I don't have a reservation, but I need a room for tonight," she says, placing a platinum credit card on the counter. The clerk's fingers fly across the keyboard. "Of course. We have several lovely rooms available. Would you prefer a city view or park view?" Robert Wilson has seen enough. He's been the CEO of this hotel chain for 3 decades, overseeing its growth from this single location to over 50 hotels worldwide. He's won awards for excellence in hospitality. His hotels are praised in travel magazines. Yet here, in his very first hotel, he's witnessing something that makes his blood run cold. He steps out of the shadows, following the elderly couple through the revolving doors. They're standing under the hotel's awning, the husband trying to book a rideshare on his phone with shaking fingers. "Excuse me," Robert calls out, his voice carrying over the sound of rain. The couple turns, and for a moment, he sees his own parents in their faces, hard-working people who saved for special occasions, who deserved respect and dignity. But he doesn't introduce himself as the CEO. Not yet. Instead, he makes a decision that will set in motion a chain of events that will transform not just this hotel, but his entire understanding of the empire he's built. This isn't just about one rude clerk or one turned-away couple. Something has gone deeply wrong in the culture of his flagship hotel, and he needs to know why. He needs to see it from the inside, as a guest, as an employee, as someone on the ground. Tomorrow, Robert Wilson, the billionaire CEO of International Plaza Hotel Group, will check into his own hotel. Not as himself, but as just another guest. What he'll discover over the next week will shock him, change him, and ultimately lead to one of the most dramatic transformations in hotel industry history. But first, he has a room to find for this couple. And perhaps a front desk clerk to teach a lesson about hospitality. 1 week earlier, Robert Wilson sat in his penthouse office on the 45th floor Plaza Corporate Tower, staring at the report in front of him. The morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the countless awards and accolades lining his walls, recognition for 3 decades of excellence in the hospitality industry. But the paper in his hands told a different story. Customer satisfaction scores at the Grand Plaza, his flagship hotel, had dropped by 30% in the last 6 months. Social media reviews were becoming increasingly negative. Several long-term employees had resigned without explanation. "I don't understand," he said to his assistant, who stood quietly by his desk. "The Grand Plaza has always been our crown jewel. What's changed?" His assistant, who had been with him for 15 years, hesitated before speaking. "Sir, the regional manager's reports all show everything is fine. The numbers look good on paper. Revenue is up." Robert leaned back in his chair, remembering the day he opened the Grand Plaza. He was just 30 years old then, betting everything he had on a dream. He'd worked his way up from being a bellhop, learning every aspect of hotel operations. His philosophy was simple: treat guests like family, and success would follow. He picked up a recent complaint letter from his desk. An elderly guest wrote about being ignored at check-in, while younger, wealthier-looking customers received immediate attention. Another mentioned overhearing staff making fun of guests behind their backs. A third described how their legitimate concerns were dismissed with rehearsed apologies and no real solutions. "Send in the auditors," his assistant suggested. "They can do a thorough evaluation." Robert shook his head, standing up to look out over the city. The Grand Plaza's distinctive architecture stood out among the surrounding buildings, its golden windows reflecting the morning sun. "No. Auditors will only see what they're shown. I need to know what's really happening." He turned back to his assistant. "Decision made. Cancel my meetings for the next 2 weeks." His assistant's eyes widened. "Sir? The board meeting on Thursday. Reschedule everything. Tell them I'm taking a personal leave. Health reasons." He walked to the small private bathroom attached to his office, studying his reflection. His silver hair and tailored suit screamed corporate executive. That would have to change. Over the next few days, Robert meticulously planned his undercover mission. He had a skilled makeup artist, one who worked in television and knew the importance of discretion, add subtle touches to alter his appearance. Slight changes to his nose shape, different eyebrows, a few carefully placed age spots. Nothing dramatic, but enough to ensure no one would connect him to the photos hanging in the hotel's lobby. He created a backstory: James Cooper, a recently retired high school teacher from another state, traveling alone to explore cities he'd always wanted to visit. A simple man with simple tastes, but one who'd saved up to stay at a nice hotel. As he packed a suitcase with deliberately ordinary clothes, khakis instead of designer suits, comfortable walking shoes instead of Italian leather, Robert felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. In 30 years, he'd never done anything like this. His management style had always been direct, relying on reports, meetings, and official channels. But something in his gut told him this was necessary. Those complaint letters kept haunting him. Had success made him too removed from the day-to-day reality of his hotels? When was the last time he'd experienced his own establishment as a regular guest? The night before his check-in, Robert couldn't sleep. He stood at his apartment window, looking down at the city lights. Tomorrow, he would walk into his own hotel as a stranger. No special treatment, no staff standing at attention, no manager hovering nearby to ensure everything was perfect. He thought about his parents, both gone now. They'd taught him the value of hard work and treating people right. His father, a factory worker, used to say, "The true measure of a person is how they treat folks they think can't help them." Had he lost sight of that somewhere along the way? His phone buzzed, another alert about a negative review of the Grand Plaza. The guest described feeling like an inconvenience rather than a valued customer. Robert turned off his phone, his determination growing stronger. He wasn't just going to observe. He would experience everything firsthand, the good, the bad, and whatever ugly truths awaited him. He would eat in the restaurant, request housekeeping services, use the gym facilities, make maintenance requests. He would talk to other guests, strike up conversations with staff, and watch how his hotel really operated when no one thought the boss was looking. As he finally lay down to sleep, Robert realized this mission was about more than just fixing customer service issues. It was about rediscovering the heart of what he'd built his company on, the belief that every guest deserved to feel special, valued, and welcomed. Tomorrow, James Cooper would check into the Grand Plaza Hotel. And Robert Wilson, the CEO who thought he knew everything about his business, would begin learning the truth about what his life's work had become. He set his alarm, knowing that in less than 24 hours, he would see exactly what that elderly couple with the graduation plans would experience. Little did he know, it would be far worse than anything he had imagined. The morning of his undercover mission arrived with a mix of clouds and nervous anticipation. Robert stood in front of his bathroom mirror, watching as the makeup artist made the final touches to his transformation. She carefully added slight bags under his eyes and softened his sharp jawline, small changes that made him look more like a retired teacher and less like a corporate executive. "Remember," she said, showing him how to touch up the makeup himself, "these products are water-resistant, but you'll need to reapply every morning. And try not to rub your face too much." Robert practiced his new walk, slightly less confident, more relaxed than his usual purposeful stride. He'd replaced his expensive cologne with a basic aftershave and wore a simple wedding ring instead of his custom-made one. His new wardrobe came from department stores, comfortable slacks, polo shirts, and a windbreaker that had seen better days. As his private driver dropped him off 3 blocks from the hotel, he couldn't risk being seen exiting his usual car. Robert felt oddly vulnerable. For the first time in decades, he was just another face in the crowd. No special treatment. No VIP status. Just James Cooper, retired teacher, wanting a nice stay in a luxury hotel he'd saved up for. He waited in line at a coffee shop, listening to 2 young women ahead of him discussing their stay at the Grand Plaza. "The place looks fancy," one said, "but the service was terrible. The staff acted like they were doing us a favor just by being there." Robert's stomach tightened. He wanted to defend his hotel, to tell them this wasn't what he'd built his company to be. Instead, he silently stirred his coffee, playing the role of an uninterested stranger. Walking toward the Grand Plaza, he remembered the day they'd opened. He'd personally greeted every guest, determined to make each person feel special. Now, approaching his own hotel as James Cooper, he felt the same butterflies he'd had 30 years ago. The lobby was as magnificent as ever, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, elegant furniture. But something felt different. The staff moved with an air of detachment. A bellman scrolled through his phone while guests struggled with their bags. The concierge desk was empty, with a small "back in 15 minutes" sign that looked like it had been there much longer. Robert joined the check-in line, consciously maintaining his James Cooper persona. He watched as the front desk staff processed guests with mechanical efficiency, no warmth, no genuine welcome, just rehearsed phrases and forced smiles. When it was his turn, the clerk barely looked at him. "Name?" "James Cooper." "I have a reservation for 5 nights. The clerk typed lazily, then frowned. "Your reservation shows a standard room, but we're upgrading you to a city view." He said it like he was doing James a huge favor, but Robert knew the truth. They often upgraded guests to higher category rooms when occupancy was low, to make the standard rooms available for last-minute bookings at premium rates. "Thank you, that's very kind," Robert said, maintaining his humble teacher demeanor. "This is my first time at such a nice hotel. I've been saving up for this trip." The clerk's expression shifted subtly, a mix of dismissal and barely concealed disdain. Robert caught it because he'd trained thousands of staff members in customer service. To an average guest, it might have just felt vaguely unwelcoming. As he was handed his key cards, Robert asked about the hotel's amenities. The clerk pointed to a brochure stand. "Everything's in there." "Next, please." Walking to the elevators, Robert noticed small details he'd never seen during his official visits. Scuff marks on the walls that should have been touched up. A loose carpet edge that could trip someone. An out-of-order sign on the ice machine that looked weathered and old. In the elevator, he chatted with a housekeeper who seemed surprised that a guest would actually talk to her. She was new, she said, just 3 months on the job. When he asked if she liked working at the Grand Plaza, her smile faltered slightly. "It's a job," she answered carefully. His room on the 23rd floor was beautiful, with stunning city views. But looking closer, he noticed the little things that spoke of declining standards. Dust in the corners. Water spots on the bathroom mirror. A slight musty smell from the air conditioning. Sitting on the bed, Robert opened his notebook, not his usual leather-bound executive journal, but a simple spiral notebook fitting for a teacher. He began writing his observations, not as a CEO, but as a guest. Every detail mattered. Every interaction would tell him something about what his hotel had become. A knock at the door startled him. It was the bellman with his bags, which he hadn't requested to be brought up. "Complimentary service," the young man said with a practiced smile, his hand lingering for a tip. As Robert reached for his wallet, not his usual one, but a well-worn leather billfold, he wondered how many other unrequested complimentary services were being pushed on guests for extra tips. Looking out at the city as evening approached, Robert felt a deep unease. This was just the beginning of his investigation, but already he could sense that the problems ran deeper than customer service scores could show. Something had changed in the very soul of his flagship hotel. Tomorrow, he would begin exploring every aspect of the guest experience. But tonight, as James Cooper, he would order room service, make a few minor maintenance requests, and start understanding what it truly meant to be a guest in his own hotel. What he didn't know was that the real revelations, the ones that would shake him to his core, were still to come. After a restless night in room 2317, Robert woke early to begin his second day of investigation. His room service breakfast arrived 30 minutes late, lukewarm at best. The server didn't apologize for the delay, simply thrust the tray at him and hurried away. While eating his cold eggs, he overheard an argument through the walls. A guest was complaining about their room not being cleaned the previous day, despite the "Please Clean Room" sign being displayed. The housekeeper's response was defensive: "We're understaffed. If you want it cleaned today, you need to call before 10 a.m. Robert made notes in his spiral notebook, his teacher's disguise allowing him to write openly in the public areas, without drawing attention. He spent the morning in the lobby, pretending to read a newspaper while observing the front desk operations. A pattern emerged. Younger guests with designer clothes received enthusiastic service. Older visitors, families with children, or anyone who didn't look wealthy enough were treated with minimal effort or subtle disdain. Around noon, he struck up a conversation with an elderly gentleman in the hotel's coffee shop. "Fourth time I've stayed here," the man said, stirring his coffee. "Used to be my favorite hotel. Something's different now. Last night, my wife and I waited 40 minutes for our car from ballet. When I complained, the manager just said, 'We're very busy, sir,' and walked away." Robert nodded sympathetically, his heart sinking. "Have you noticed other changes?" "The little things," the man replied. "No more turn-down service unless you're in a suite. The concierge desk is often empty. The staff seem unhappy. You can feel it in the air." In the afternoon, Robert explored the hotel's facilities. The gym equipment had maintenance tags dated 3 weeks ago. The spa's relaxation room was messy, used towels piled in corners. At the pool, a family was complaining about the cold water temperature. The attendant's response? "The heater's been broken. Nothing I can do about it." He lingered in the employee corridors, noting how different the atmosphere was from the public areas. Staff members spoke freely here, unaware of his true identity. Their conversations revealed deep frustration. "Did you see the new schedule?" one housekeeper asked another. "They cut our hours again but expect the same number of rooms cleaned." "At least you get hours," another replied. "They keep hiring new people at lower rates and pushing out the experienced staff." Later, in the hotel restaurant, Robert ordered dinner at the bar. The bartender, an older man named Joe who'd worked there for 12 years, was more talkative than most staff. "Place changed when the new management company took over daily operations," Joe confided, wiping glasses. "All they care about is cutting costs." "Training? Gone. Employee meals? Cancelled. Recognition programs? Forgotten." Robert nearly dropped his fork. He hadn't approved any operational changes to the management structure. On paper, everything looked the same. But clearly, decisions were being made without his knowledge. A commotion at the restaurant entrance caught his attention. A family was arguing with the maitre d'. Their reservation was missing, despite them showing a confirmation email. The maitre d's solution? A 2-hour wait or dining at the bar. "Happens all the time now," Joe whispered. "The new booking system's a mess, but management won't fix it. Cheaper to apologize than solve the problem, they say." That evening, Robert requested extra towels from housekeeping. After 3 calls and 2 hours, they finally arrived. The housekeeper looked exhausted. "Sorry for the delay," she said, sincerity in her voice. "I'm covering 3 floors alone tonight." Back in his room, Robert reviewed his notes. The problems were worse than he'd imagined. This wasn't just about poor customer service, it was systematic deterioration of everything he'd built. Cost-cutting measures he'd never approved. Training programs abandoned. Staff overworked and undervalued. He opened his laptop, careful to use his James Cooper email account, and wrote a detailed complaint letter to hotel management. He wanted to see how they'd respond to detailed, legitimate concerns from a guest. The automatic reply was immediate: "Thank you for your feedback. We value your opinion and will review your concerns. For faster service, please follow us on social media." Robert closed his laptop, his jaw clenched. Tomorrow, he'd dive deeper. He needed to understand how his flagship hotel had become a place where guest experiences were reduced to automated responses and empty promises. As he prepared for bed, the sound of arguing voices drifted up from the street below. A group of guests was trying to get their car from valet parking. In the past, this hotel service had been legendary. Now it was becoming legendary for all the wrong reasons. This wasn't just about fixing a few customer service issues anymore. Something had rotted in the foundation of his life's work, and he needed to find out how deep the decay went. Little did he know, the next day would bring revelations that would shake his faith not just in his hotel's management, but in the entire system he'd built over 3 decades. On his 3rd day undercover, Robert decided to spend time getting to know the hotel staff better. As James Cooper, the friendly retired teacher, he had the perfect cover to ask questions and listen to their stories. His first meaningful conversation happened early morning in the hotel cafe. He noticed a young waitress named Jenny struggling to manage the breakfast rush alone. When she finally got a break, she practically collapsed into the chair at his table, apologizing for the slow service. "It's not your fault," Robert said kindly. "You're handling everything wonderfully by yourself. Is it always this understaffed?" Jenny glanced around before speaking softly. "It wasn't always like this. When I started 2 years ago, we had 3 servers for breakfast shift. Now it's usually just me. They say it's budget cuts, but the hotel is charging more than ever." She told him about working double shifts, missing her son's school events, and how the management had cut their health benefits. "Most of us can't afford to quit," she explained. "They know that, and they take advantage of it." Later that morning, Robert encountered Mike, a maintenance worker in his 50s, fixing a leaky faucet in the spa area. As James Cooper, he struck up a conversation about the challenges of maintaining such a large building. Mike's story was equally concerning. Been here 15 years, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Used to have a team of 6 handling maintenance. Now we're down to 3. Can't keep up with repairs properly anymore. Management just puts band-aids on everything. He showed Robert a list of pending maintenance requests. Some dated back months. See this leak in the pool area? Been reporting it for weeks. They won't approve the cost of proper repairs. Just tell us to patch it up temporarily. During lunch, Robert sat at the bar again, where Joe the bartender introduced him to Maria, a housekeeper taking her break. She'd worked at the Grand Plaza for 20 years. This place was like family once, Maria said, her eyes distant. The old management knew everyone's names, celebrated our birthdays. Now? They cut our hours, pile on more rooms to clean, and write us up if we take too long, making sure things are perfect. She showed him her schedule: 15 rooms to clean in an 8-hour shift. That's 20 minutes per room, she explained. How can we give proper attention in 20 minutes? But if we take longer, they threaten to replace us with agency staff. Throughout the day, Robert heard similar stories from other staff members. A bellman described how the new management had eliminated the employee meal program, forcing staff to either bring food from home or go hungry during their shifts. A front desk clerk revealed they were no longer allowed to offer complimentary upgrades to loyal guests unless they complained first. The most disturbing conversation came from Sarah, a night shift supervisor who'd been there for 8 years. She caught him in the lobby around midnight, noticing him making notes in his notebook. If you're writing about your stay, she said, glancing at his notebook, there's something you should know. She told him about the new regional manager's policy of overbooking the hotel deliberately, knowing they'd have to walk some guests to other hotels. They target certain types of guests, she whispered. Older folks, families with kids, people who booked through discount sites. They figure these guests are less likely to make a big fuss on social media. Robert felt sick to his stomach. This was the opposite of everything he'd built his company on. His hotels were supposed to be places where every guest felt valued, where staff were treated with respect and dignity. As he walked through the quiet corridors that night, he saw his hotel through new eyes. Behind the marble floors and crystal chandeliers was a workforce feeling betrayed and demoralized. The proud professionals he'd once known had been reduced to overworked, underappreciated shadows of their former selves. Back in his room, Robert added to his growing list of discoveries. The problems weren't just surface-level issues with customer service. There was a systematic dismantling of everything that had once made the Grand Plaza special. He thought about Jenny missing her son's events, Maria rushing through room cleanings, Mike's growing list of repairs, and Sarah's revelation about the targeted overbooking policy. These weren't just employees, they were people whose lives were being directly impacted by decisions made in corporate offices far removed from the daily reality of hotel operations. As he prepared for bed, Robert heard laughter from the staff corridor, not the warm, friendly kind, but bitter and cynical. Another day in paradise, someone said sarcastically. Tomorrow, he decided, he would dig deeper into the management layer. He needed to understand how these changes had happened without his knowledge, who was really making these decisions, and why his once proud flagship hotel had become a place where both guests and staff felt like unwanted burdens. What he didn't realize was that the next day would bring him face to face with the darker side of his hotel's operations, revelations that would force him to question everything about the company he'd spent his life building. The 6th day of Robert's undercover stay began with an unexpected incident. While having his morning coffee in the lobby, he witnessed an intense exchange between a guest and the front office manager, Mr. Richardson. A well-dressed businessman was complaining about a significant charge on his bill. This room service charge, I never ordered this. Mr. Richardson, a thin man with a permanent frown, barely looked at the bill. Sir, our records show the order was placed from your room. I was in meetings all day. I wasn't even in the hotel. Robert watched as Mr. Richardson's lips curled into a practiced smile. Perhaps someone else in your room ordered it? A family member? I'm here alone. This is ridiculous. Instead of investigating the charge, Mr. Richardson simply removed it with a condescending flourish. "We'll take care of it this time, sir. In the future, please keep better track of your expenses." The guest left fuming, and Robert made another note in his notebook. As he wrote, he overheard two staff members whispering nearby. "Richardson's at it again," one said. "That's the third phantom charge this week. Helps him meet the revenue targets," the other replied. "Corporate doesn't care how he does it." Robert felt his blood run cold. Was his hotel deliberately adding false charges to guest bills? He needed to know more. Throughout the day, he positioned himself in various spots around the hotel, observing Mr. Richardson's management style. The pattern was disturbing. The manager was polite and attentive to certain guests, particularly those who looked wealthy or influential. But with others, he was dismissive or even hostile. Around noon, Robert witnessed something that made his hands shake with anger. An Indian family had requested a room change because their air conditioning wasn't working. Instead of addressing the issue, Richardson was making excuses. "Perhaps you're not familiar with how air conditioning works in America," Richardson said condescendingly. "I assure you it's functioning perfectly." Robert had checked the maintenance logs earlier. That room's AC had been reported faulty 3 times this week. Later, in the staff cafeteria, Robert sat with a group of employees who'd grown to trust James Cooper as a sympathetic ear. They shared more stories about Richardson's management style. "He has a nickname for different types of guests," a housekeeper confided. "The profit makers get everything they want. The budget wasters get the worst rooms and service." Another employee added, "He tells us to push extra charges on certain rooms. If guests complain, we remove them, but many don't notice or feel too embarrassed to argue." The most shocking revelation came from a junior accountant who was eating lunch alone. After some gentle prompting from Robert, she revealed that Richardson had created a complex system of hidden fees and charges. Rooms were deliberately assigned to put certain guests near ongoing maintenance work, then compensated with credits that never quite matched the inconvenience. "It's all about the numbers," she explained quietly. "Every month, he shows corporate how much additional revenue he's generated. Nobody asks how he does it." By evening, Robert had seen enough to understand the extent of the corruption. Richardson had created a toxic culture where discrimination and dishonesty were standard practice. Staff members who objected were scheduled for impossible shifts or given poor performance reviews until they quit. The breaking point came during dinner. Robert watched as Richardson berated a young waitress in front of guests because she'd comped a meal for an elderly couple whose food had been served cold after an hour's wait. "Who gave you permission to make that decision?" Richardson demanded. "That comes out of your paycheck." The waitress, fighting back tears, tried to explain. "Sir, they waited so long, and the gentleman is diabetic. Next time, let them complain to corporate. We don't give free meals, because people can't plan their medication properly." Robert gripped his notebook so hard the spiral binding bent. This wasn't just poor management, it was cruel and potentially dangerous. Back in his room, Robert reviewed everything he'd documented about Richardson's tactics. Discriminatory room assignments. Phantom charges on bills. Manipulation of maintenance schedules for extra fees. Mistreatment of staff who showed basic human decency. Creating a culture of fear and discrimination. He thought about his conversation with the regional manager last month, who had praised Richardson for increasing revenue and reducing operational costs. Now he understood how those impressive numbers were achieved. As he prepared for bed, Robert heard the waitress from earlier crying in the staff corridor. Another employee was comforting her, "Don't let him get to you. We've all been there." Tomorrow would be his last full day undercover. He'd seen enough of the problems, now he needed to understand why his supposedly robust corporate oversight had failed to catch any of this. What he didn't know was that Richardson's schemes were just the tip of the iceberg. The next day would reveal how deep the corruption went, leading all the way up to some very surprising places in his own corporate office. On his 7th day undercover, Robert decided to dig into how such widespread problems had gone unnoticed by corporate oversight. His investigation led him to Linda, a senior front desk supervisor who had been working at the hotel for over 2 decades. During a quiet moment at the desk, Robert, as James Cooper, mentioned his concern about some of the practices he'd observed. Linda looked around carefully before speaking. "Meet me in the staff break room during my lunch break," she whispered. "There's more you should know." Hours later, in a corner of the empty break room, Linda shared a disturbing story. "It's not just Richardson," she explained, picking at her sandwich nervously. "The whole system is rigged from the top. You know Thomas Parker, the regional manager?" Robert nodded, feeling his stomach tighten. Thomas Parker was someone he'd personally promoted 2 years ago. He's the one who brought in all these new policies. But here's the thing, he owns shares in the management company that's really running this place now. The same company that's cutting our benefits, reducing staff, and pushing all these hidden charges. Robert nearly dropped his coffee cup. This was a clear conflict of interest that should have been reported to him. Linda continued, "Every month before the corporate inspections, we get a script. We're told which rooms to show, which staff members can speak to auditors. Everything is staged. Those who play along get bonuses. Those who don't." She showed him her reduced schedule, cut from 5 days to 3. "I refused to participate in their little show last month. This was my punishment." Throughout the day, Robert discovered more evidence of systemic corruption. In the accounting office, he overheard a conversation about creative bookkeeping to hide the real numbers from corporate. In the maintenance department, he found records of safety violations that had been covered up rather than fixed. The most shocking revelation came during an afternoon staff meeting he managed to sit in on by pretending to be lost. Richardson was instructing the staff about an upcoming corporate visit. "Remember, when the auditors come next week, we show them only the renovated rooms on floors 10 through 12. The problematic guests will be checked out or moved. Any staff member who deviates from the approved talking points will face immediate disciplinary action." One brave housekeeper raised her hand. "But what about the black mold in the service corridors? The broken emergency exits?" Richardson's smile was cold. "Those areas are not part of the tour. Anyone who mentions them will be looking for a new job. Are we clear?" Robert watched as heads nodded silently. The fear in the room was palpable. Later, he found that same housekeeper crying in the laundry room. Her name was Grace, and she'd worked at the Grand Plaza for 15 years. "I remember when this place was different," she told him, wiping her eyes. "We used to be proud to work here. Now? We're just trying to survive while they squeeze every penny out of guests and staff alike." She showed him photos on her phone, dangerous electrical wiring, broken safety equipment, dirty air vents. They know about all of this. They just don't care anymore. By evening, Robert had uncovered a network of deception that stretched far beyond one bad manager. Thomas Parker had systematically replaced experienced staff with temporary workers, redirected maintenance budgets to show artificial profits, and created a culture of fear and silence. The regional corporate office, which was supposed to provide oversight, was actually complicit in the scheme. Regular inspections were choreographed performances. Financial reports were carefully doctored. Even guest surveys were manipulated, with negative reviews mysteriously disappearing from the system. In the hotel bar that night, Joe the bartender shared one final piece of the puzzle. "You know what's really sad," he said, polishing glasses. "We've tried to report this. Multiple staff members have called the corporate whistleblower line. But guess who manages those complaints? Mr. Parker's office." Robert sat in his room that night, his notebook filled with evidence of corruption, fraud, and potentially criminal negligence. His beloved hotel, the foundation of his business empire, had become a hollow shell of its former self. Tomorrow would be his last day undercover. He had all the evidence he needed. The question now was not just how to fix these problems, but how to rebuild an entire system that had failed at every level. As he prepared for bed, he heard Richardson's voice in the hallway, berating another staff member. Robert clenched his fists. Tomorrow, everything would change. But first, he had one more day to witness just how far his hotel had fallen. What he didn't know was that his final day undercover would bring him face to face with a situation that would force him to reveal his identity sooner than planned. The morning of Robert's final undercover day began with an emergency. At 6:30 a.m., alarms blared through the hotel corridors. A pipe had burst in the north wing, flooding several rooms on the 20th floor. As guests evacuated, Robert watched the chaos unfold. Richardson was nowhere to be found. The understaffed maintenance team struggled to respond. Water began seeping down to the 19th floor. "This is exactly what we warned them about," Mike, the maintenance worker, told him as they helped elderly guests down the emergency stairs. "That pipe was flagged for replacement months ago. They kept putting it off to save money." Then Robert saw something that made his blood run cold. The emergency exit on the 18th floor was chained shut, the same violation Grace had mentioned yesterday. Guests trying to evacuate were forced to climb back up to find another way down. "Someone could die because of this," Robert muttered, his CEO instincts taking over. He couldn't maintain his cover any longer. Not with lives at risk. Just then, Richardson finally appeared, more concerned about the water damage to the expensive carpeting than the evacuated guests huddled in the lobby. "Get these people out of the lobby," he barked at the staff. "They're making the place look bad." Among the evacuated guests was the elderly couple Robert had seen being turned away his first night. They'd managed to get a room after all, and now the wife was having an anxiety attack from climbing down 12 flights of stairs. "Please," the husband begged the front desk clerk, "my wife needs to sit down. Can we at least wait in the restaurant until our room is cleared?" "The restaurant doesn't open until 7:30, the clerk replied mechanically. "You'll have to wait outside." That was the final straw. Robert stepped forward, his posture straightening, his James Cooper persona falling away. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades as CEO, "the restaurant will open now." Richardson spun around. "Sir, you can't." "I can," Robert said quietly. "And I will." He pulled out his wallet, his real wallet, and removed his ID card. "I'm Robert Wilson, CEO of International Plaza Hotel Group. And this nightmare ends now." The lobby fell silent. Richardson's face went pale. Staff members stared in shock. The elderly couple looked confused. First, Robert announced, "Anyone who needs to sit down, please follow me to the restaurant." He turned to Jenny, the waitress he'd met earlier. "Jenny, would you help get these people some coffee and water? Use my personal account." As guests were settled in the restaurant, Robert began taking charge of the crisis. He called his emergency response team, arranged immediate accommodation at nearby hotels, and organized transport for displaced guests. Then he turned to the staff. "I've spent the last week undercover in my own hotel," he said to the assembled employees. "I've seen the understaffing, the cut corners, the mistreatment. I've heard your stories. I know about the safety violations, the discriminatory practices, and the fraudulent charges." Richardson tried to interject, but Robert held up his hand. "Don't bother explaining. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out once this crisis is handled." Throughout the morning, Robert worked alongside his staff, helping guests, coordinating repairs, and beginning the process of documenting everything he'd discovered. He called an emergency board meeting for that afternoon. By noon, the immediate crisis was under control. Robert gathered all available staff in the ballroom. Looking at their faces, Jenny, Joe, Maria, Mike, Grace, Linda, he saw both fear and hope in their eyes. "I owe you all an apology," he began. "I failed you by becoming too removed from the day-to-day operations of this hotel. I trusted the wrong people and didn't listen to the right ones. That changes today." He outlined immediate changes. Safety violations would be fixed within 24 hours, staff hours and benefits would be restored, and a new management team would be appointed, one that included promoted frontline staff who knew the hotel's real needs. But most importantly, he continued, I'm reinstating something we never should have lost, our commitment to treating every guest, and every employee, like family. He told them about his first night, watching the elderly couple being turned away. That moment showed me how far we'd fallen from our values. Today marks the beginning of our return to what made this hotel great, its people. The elderly couple was still there, now comfortably settled in a suite Robert had personally arranged. He went to apologize to them personally. Your wife's medical background reminded me of my mother, he told them. She raised me alone, working as a nurse. She taught me that how you treat people matters more than anything else. As the day wound down, Robert sat in his old office, now stripped of Richardson's personal items, and began writing a comprehensive plan for rebuilding his hotel's culture. But he knew tomorrow would bring an even bigger challenge, confronting the systemic corruption that had infected his entire company. What he didn't realize was that his decision to go undercover would spark a transformation that would reach far beyond just one hotel, changing the entire hospitality industry's approach to management and service. 1 month after Robert Wilson's dramatic revelation at the Grand Plaza, the hotel had undergone a remarkable transformation. The morning sun streamed through the newly cleaned windows of the lobby as Robert walked through the front doors, not as an undercover guest, but as a changed CEO. The first thing he noticed was the genuine smile on the front desk clerk's face as she helped a family check in. Jenny, now promoted to guest services manager, was showing an elderly couple to the restaurant, her hand supportively on the woman's arm. The changes went far beyond surface-level customer service. Every safety violation had been fixed. The maintenance team, now properly staffed, had cleared their entire backlog of repairs. The hallways sparkled, the elevators worked smoothly, and the emergency exits were all properly accessible. But the most significant change was in the people. Good morning, Mr. Wilson, called Mike, the maintenance worker who'd helped during the flood. As the new head of facility operations, he'd implemented a preventive maintenance program that was already being adopted across other hotels in the chain. Maria, the housekeeper who'd struggled with impossible room quotas, now led a team that focused on quality over speed. Room cleaning times had been restored to reasonable levels, and guest satisfaction scores were soaring. In the restaurant, Joe the bartender was training new staff members, teaching them that genuine hospitality couldn't be reduced to a script. Remember, Robert overheard him saying, every guest has a story. Our job is to make sure their story here is a good one. The transformation hadn't been easy. The investigation into Thomas Parker's corruption had revealed a network of kickbacks and fraudulent contracts stretching through several layers of management. The resulting cleanup had led to dozens of resignations and restructuring across the entire hotel group. Robert paused at the front desk, where Linda, the supervisor who'd helped expose the corruption, was now the hotel's general manager. How are the numbers? He asked. Better than ever, she smiled. Turns out treating people right is good for business. Our repeat booking rate has doubled. Staff turnover is down 80%. And we're actually spending less on operations because we're fixing problems properly the first time. The elderly couple from the flood day had become regular guests, choosing the Grand Plaza for their monthly visits to their grandchildren. Robert spotted them enjoying breakfast in the restaurant. The husband waved him over. Quite a change from that morning, the man said. You know, we've stayed in luxury hotels all over the world, but what you've created here is special. It feels like coming home. Robert thought about his own journey. The week undercover had taught him more than 30 years of reports and meetings ever could. He'd learned that true hospitality couldn't be measured just in revenue figures or efficiency metrics. It lived in the small moments, a kind word, a helping hand, a genuine smile. That afternoon, Robert called a staff meeting. Unlike the tense gatherings under Richardson's regime, this one felt like a family reunion. Staff members chatted comfortably, sharing stories and ideas. 1 month ago, Robert began, this hotel had lost its way. We'd forgotten that a great hotel isn't built on marble floors and crystal chandeliers. It's built on people, both the ones who work here and the ones who stay here. He shared the news that the Grand Plaza's transformation had caught the industry's attention. Other hotel chains were beginning to reevaluate their own management practices. The Grand Plaza model of ethical, people-first hospitality was becoming a case study in business schools. But here's what matters most, he continued. Every person who walks through those doors, whether they're paying with a platinum card or their life savings, deserves to feel valued. Every employee who works here deserves to feel proud. That's not just good business, it's good humanity. As he concluded the meeting, Grace, the housekeeper who dared to speak up about safety violations, raised her hand. Mr. Wilson, remember when you said your mother taught you that how you treat people matters more than anything else? Robert nodded. Well, she smiled, I think she'd be proud of what you've done here. Later that evening, Robert stood in the lobby, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors through the grand windows. He remembered his first day as a young entrepreneur, opening this hotel with dreams of creating something special. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of those dreams, letting spreadsheets and profit margins overshadow the human element that made hospitality truly meaningful. It took becoming James Cooper, experiencing his own hotel as an ordinary guest, to remember what mattered most. A young family walked through the front doors, looking tired after a long journey. The front desk clerk greeted them warmly, upgrading their room without being asked, arranging for complimentary milk and cookies for their children. Robert smiled. The Grand Plaza was more than just a hotel again. It was a place where every guest felt like family, every employee felt valued, and the spirit of true hospitality lived in every interaction. As he headed home that evening, Robert thought about all the James Coopers out there, ordinary people looking for a place that would treat them with dignity and respect. Thanks to 1 week Undercover, his hotel was once again that place. And that, he realized, was the greatest success of all. The end.